somehow you're watering down your radicalism. Butch Ware is too radical for the Green Party.
I was stopped for driving while black 17 times before I reached my 18th birthday. An officer drew his service weapon and pointed it at my face. So we need to, in this moment, organize for maximal political power. We never condemn the resistance of Occupy people to their occupiers.
In your mind, are the Uyghurs being persecuted?
There has never been a more dangerous dealer of death than the American empire. We destroyed Iraq. We destroyed Afghanistan, destroyed Palestine. We are the Death Star. These so-called leftists apparently have never read any books on the subject, nor have they had any conversation with actual Uyghurs. And it is better for these people to have a red fascist than a blue fascist.
The US elections are nearly upon us, and we have all been subject to the empty words and rhetoric of the two main political parties. The Green Party has gained a lot of traction, especially amongst the country's small but very important Muslim community. I've already spoken to and interviewed the leader of the Greens, Dr. Jill Stein, but today I have the pleasure to speak to Professor Butch Bilal Ware, its vice presidential nominee. Professor Butch Ware is a lifelong activist and educator specializing in the history of empire, colonialism, genocide, and revolution. For the past 2 decades, Professor Ware has put scholarship in service of the people, especially in response to the ongoing genocide in Gaza, as well as the George Floyd murder in 2020. Professor Butch Ware, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the Thinking Muslim.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi. It's an honor and a privilege. I'm overdue, but glad I was able to make time in the midst of a busy campaign to get this in. So it's great to talk to you.
No, I really appreciate your time. And I know you've probably got a punishing schedule at the moment. So Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for joining us.
Precisely the adjective. Yeah, punishing.
It's punishing. I watched a really great interview between you and the Ansari on the Ansari podcast. And I was surprised to hear that you had become Muslim at the age of 15. Before we begin with the politics and with the many questions I have about the Green Party, can I just ask you? I mean, it's very rare for someone to embrace Islam, I think, anyway, at the age of 15. Like, what brought you to Islam at that age?
Yeah. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X cover to cover in one night when I was 15 years old.
Yeah.
And I remember that night like it was yesterday. I mean, I could not put that book down. Changed positions on my bed a few times, sat in the corner on the floor for a while, but I read it cover to cover. I couldn't put it down, reread certain portions of it. I wanted what Malcolm had at the end of that book. Malcolm, like me, had been in a lot of dark places in his life. I was raised in extreme poverty, very difficult circumstances in Washington, D.C. My father had a 6th grade education. My mother was 15 years old when she was pregnant with me, was told by her high school guidance counselor to get an abortion. I came in to this world under difficult circumstances, as Malcolm had. And what I saw in that book was that, no matter how dark the places, you might have seen may be, that the light of God could find you there and lift you up to the highest of all stations. So I went to my school library the next day after not sleeping that night, and I checked out an English translation of the Qur'an.
Wow.
And I read that cover to cover the next night. So I had stayed up, for 2 consecutive nights without sleeping. And I actually, when I finished the Quran in translation, I fell asleep and missed my school bus and slept through school that day. So, Malcolm and the Quran made me a truant. But I hadn't taken my Shahada before the end of the week. I told my mom that day that I'm Muslim. And then I looked up in the phone book for where the nearest mosque was to go make my Shahada. I had also got a couple of books that were like instructions on how to pray and how do it's just something simple. I think that it was one of Maududi's books was actually also at my public library at that time. I grabbed a copy of that and just learned the basics. We didn't have the internet back then, so I had to look these things up in books. My mom's I told her I'm Muslim. And I said, I want to go, make my Shahada at this mosque. And she was like, that's wonderful, honey, but it's going to have to wait till the weekend because I have work, So we waited until the weekend and then we drove out. to the
Right.
Islamic Center in Fridley, Minnesota. I was living in Minneapolis at that time. I made my shahada then.
Oh, that's really wonderful to hear. It's inspirational. And I want to pick up on the Malcolm X
Yeah.
connection there because Malcolm X was a radical and he fused his radicalism with Islam.
Yep.
And in many ways, Islam is a radical faith. It's a faith that requires us to call for justice and against all the odds. And so, in many ways, we are all responsible for speaking out against tyrannical rule,
Yep.
oppression, genocide, as in the case of Gaza.
Yep.
How important is that melding of radicalism with Islam in your philosophy?
For me, so just to be clear, reading those two books consecutively on back-to-back nights, they were a single argument for me, right? One was an autobiographical narrative about how to triumph over both internal and external oppressors. And then the other was a universal narrative. The Quran was a universal narrative about how to triumph over internal and external oppressors. And when I read the Quran, even that first time, the anti-imperialist nature of the Quran, the radical, emancipatory, liberatory message of the Quran was apparent to me, right? Because why? Well, where do we find Sayyidina Ibrahim, alayhi salatu wasalam? Face to face with Nimrod, the most powerful emperor and tyrant on the face of the earth in his time. Where do we find Moses and Aaron, Musa and Harun? We find them 10 toes down, face to face with the most dangerous tyrant and emperor on the face of the earth in their time. Where do we find Yahya? Where do we find Isa? Peace be upon all of the prophets. We find them being persecuted by the Roman Empire. Why? Because the people of God always stand against the fundamental form of oppression in their time. That's what makes them the people of God. If you have genuine compassion for the children of Adam, and in many ways, the Quran's most radical argument is also its simplest, right? You are
Yeah.
all the children of Adam, and it is from dirt that you were created. Your nobility lies in the divine breath that is breathed into you, that caress that makes you, right? The human being is not made in the Quran just through a simple act of speech. No, God asked in Surah Al-Sad to Iblis, why did you not bow to that which I made with my own hand? And then in two separate ayahs of Quran, God says, and when I have fashioned it and breathed into it of my spirit, then fall down before it prostrate. So the human being is this sacred creation. And indeed, I ennobled the children of Adam. For me, the struggle to keep harm and oppression from reaching the children of Adam, that was wired into my understanding of the Quran from the beginning. And it was clear from Malcolm's experience that he was carrying forth that radical emancipatory legacy in his age. Last thing that I'll say in response to this, people that don't know my academic work before I got pulled into politics, my scholarship is about the history of West African Muslim scholars who, from the rise of the Atlantic slave trade itself, also drew on this emancipatory potential of Islam to struggle against the fundamental evils of the age, right? They organized resistance to the rise of the Atlantic slave trade. They organized resistance to French, to Dutch, to British imperial occupation, Spanish imperial occupation. These African Muslims, like an African-American Muslim like Malcolm or myself, were people who read the Quran as a radical manifesto of resistance to white supremacy. And so in that respect, I feel quite comfortable, in point of fact, in this new position, different from my academic life, because I feel like I've been tagged into a fight, that Malcolm took up in his time, and that the great scholars that I've written about in my work took up in their time.
Is your radicalism shared by many Muslims in the United States? I mean, I note that I read somewhere, and forgive me if I've read it wrong, but you are from a Sufi tradition, or you embrace a Sufi tradition, and in a West African Sufi tradition, and in the United States, we associate a lot of the time, at least from the outside,
Yeah.
Sufism with quietism, with an apolitical Islam that tends to be in cahoots with dictators and
Yep.
princes around the world. Maybe I'm exaggerating a bit for effect here, but
It's
how does
not, but
Sufism?
it's not a caricature by any means. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. No, I just want to understand. So, how does your Sufism interact with your Islam and your radicalism?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, so I mean, for people that have been knowing me, as an intellectual in the Muslim community, I've been trying to persuade people that Sufism isn't about, polite middle class tea parties in the suburbs, and chanting dhikr. That the real Sufis, the people like, for example, Abdul Qadir Jazairi, Emir Abdul Qadir. At age 19, he was crowned with the ceremonial turban that made him the greatest living heir of Ibn Arabi in his time. Okay. And at age 20, he was organizing armed resistance to the French occupation of Algeria, right?
Yeah.
Abdul Qadir Khan, a Qadri Sufi himself in the 1770s, abolished not just the international slave trade as it was being conducted in the Senegal River Valley, but he abolished the institution of slavery itself with an emancipation proclamation. He said that not a single verse of the book of God should ever be held in bondage, so that anyone capable of reciting so much as a single ayah of the Qur'an that was in his territories was to be immediately freed. And just to be clear, an ayah of the Quran, like Qaf, is an ayah of the Quran. And he
Yeah.
he said that the Muslim that should be protected from the indignities of enslavement is the one that says La ilaha illallah, even if she pronounces it Ra ilaha illallah. In other words, he took the legal exemption of Muslims enslaving other Muslims as a way of creating a blanket emancipation proclamation. Qadri Sufi, right? And I wrote about him in my first book, The Walking Quran. Sheikh Uthman
Mhm.
Danfodio, Qadri Sufi, also Northern Nigeria, organized resistance to the Atlantic slave trade. El Hajj Martal, Tijani Sufi, organized resistance to French occupation. Sheikh Ahmadu Bamba, creator of the Tariqa Muridiyya, spent 27 years of his life under house arrest because of his resistance to French colonial rule. So the Sufi tradition that I know is one that tethers together spirituality with social justice. And it is a Sufi tradition, and this is important, especially for this audience to understand that it is a sober Sufi tradition. It is a Sufi tradition that is rooted in Quran and Sunnah and nothing else. The idea behind the West African Sufi tradition is and always has been that the traditional branches of the Islamic religious sciences are three, that we have and they correspond to the Hadith of Jibril, where the Prophet والسلام, was asked to describe the contents of the religion: Islam, Iman, Ihsan. In
Mm.
response to Islam, he named the five pillars. In a response to Iman, he named 6 articles of faith. It's belief in God, his books, his angels, his messengers, decree, and the hour. And in response to question, what is Ihsan? He said, it is worshiping God as though seeing him, and if you do not see him, knowing that he sees you. And the way that this has been understood in a West African context is that this is to put a 24-hour surveillance camera not on your deeds, but on your intentions, on why you do what you do. And that this is the path of Ihsan. And so these are Sufi scholars who, why they did what they did was to try to keep needless harm and oppression from reaching the most precious thing that God created, the children of Adam.
Now, you're standing as VP of the Green Party, and I've received the occasional message. I think it's certainly not in plurality, but there's an occasional message I receive from Muslims in America and elsewhere, which suggests that, in a sense, what by joining the Green Party and by fighting within the political process, you're somewhat diluting that radical tradition because it's a secular, it's a corrupt political process, and it's better to fight from outside than join it. Fine, you're not joining it by by embracing it, but you're joining it by fighting this election. I mean, how would you respond to accusations that somehow you're watering down your radicalism?
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful question. So was Malcolm watering down his radicalism when he created the Organization for Afro-American Unity, an explicitly political organization? No, he was not. Was Huey P. Newton, founder of the Black Panthers, watering down his radicalism when he ran for elected office not once but twice? Was Huey P. Newton some kind of sellout? Was Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, a sellout when he advocated for organizing? What Kwame Ture said, and by the way, people don't know that Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, was a direct student of Malcolm X. Malcolm said, we are not outnumbered, we are out organized. Malcolm argued explicitly for political organization as the basis of empowerment, for Black people, for Muslims, for all colonized people. And he was a supporter of those political movements that embodied that. So, what Stokely Carmichael did with this, with Malcolm's insights about organizing, he said people usually mobilize around issues, but revolutionaries organize against systems. Let me repeat that. People usually mobilize around issues, revolutionaries organize against systems. So, as a historian myself, it is plain that successful modern revolutions always contain a kernel of political party organizing within them. And the reason is that no party is bigger than the movement. The movement is bigger than any party, but political parties allow movement energy to be galvanized towards organizational and institutional expression. It allows you to leverage power. And you mentioned in the introduction that the first time I got on social media is true. I didn't have a social media account before George Floyd was murdered. So the 140 whatever thousand followers on Instagram, that's all since since 2020. Well, what happened in 2020? There was a mobilization around an issue, and it swept the whole globe, but no organizing against the system. So then what happened? The system responded to the fact that this was a moment and not a movement by more repression than before. So police have killed more people in every subsequent year, 2021, 2022, 2023, now 2024. They kill more people every year. And now the cops that used to just beat up people like me, and by the way, I was stopped for driving while Black, never ticketed, 17 times before I reached my 18th birthday. An officer drew his service weapon and pointed it at my face on 36th and 10th on the south side of Minneapolis, a few blocks away from where George Floyd would eventually be choked a couple decades later. So I know the carceral state uphand on my own flesh. And the reality is that people did not organize against the system. So now the brutality that used to be exercised just against people like me is now being extended to middle-class kids on college campuses, right? Because this police state is now defending the imperial fascists abroad with imperial fascism at home. So what do we think is going to happen as Muslims in this moment where Gaza has people on fire, if we do not have an organizational, institutional structure for our resistance? When these white liberals stop seeing babies blown up on their phones, do you think that they're going to be interested in divesting from the apartheid state or Palestinian liberation? No. So we need to, in this moment, organize for maximal political power. And that means, yes, you take electoral avenues, but it also means that you do not foreclose on non-electoral avenues, such as direct action, boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning. And of course, as is plain, I have made it plain. I said this in an interview on Middle East Eye. We never condemn the resistance of Occupy people to their occupiers. Somebody asked me, how would Malcolm have responded, to our current moment? I said, well, we know how he would have answered the question, do you condemn Hamas? We know how Malcolm would have answered that. And I'll just make my position plain. I have said countless times that resistance on the part of Occupy people, that's enshrined as a right in international law. Our obligations go beyond this because it is not a right to resist occupation. It is a responsibility to resist occupation. You are not permitted in our deen to have if someone wants to enter your home and kidnap or violate your family members, you are not allowed to just say, I have a right to resist, but I'm going to forego that right to resist. You have a responsibility to resist. And the jurists, the scholars understood this, so that they only considered themselves absolved of that responsibility if certain formal requirements were met. If you were outnumbered more than 2-to-1 on the field of battle, or if casualty ratios were in that, then you had an option where you could sue for peace or negotiate. But below that threshold, you are required to resist.
Now, that's really, good to hear, actually. It's really reassuring to hear. I I was speaking to a friend of mine. He's a historian, and he said something to me. He said that Butch Ware is too radical for the Green Party. Um,
Well,
and, we've
Jill
we've got an
to think otherwise. Go ahead. Yeah.
well, see, we've got an equivalent. We've got a Green Party. I know they're not connected. We've got a Green Party here, and I spoke to a Muslim who's a member of the Green Party, and he said, it's full of well-to-do, well-heeled white liberals who tend to not want controversy. How much is the Green Party at the moment restraining your radicalism?
In no way is the Green Party restraining my radicalism. When they made this invitation, I said, "You guys do know who I am, right?" I said, listen, I'm going to give you 24 hours to reconsider this offer. I need y'all to go ahead and run as much tape on me as you can. Good friend of mine, Hussein Jaffer, I did Instagram live with him. Also, UK guy. He said, we thought that when you got pulled into the politics, we were suspicious because we thought you might mellow out. And I'm like, mellow out? What would I look like, trying to embody the legacy of Malcolm if I now turned around and mellowed out? So the first thing to say is that when I said this, I said, you guys better run tape on me. They were like, the campaign manager, Jason Call, Jill Stein, he said, no, we know. That's why we brought you on the campaign. And Jill Stein said, absolutely. And so Jill has been, completely lockstep. And she also said, if there are places where our platform does not go far enough, then you let us know, right? So
Brilliant.
they've been open to, to being responsive both to the concerns of the Muslims and to the concerns of those of us who are, committed anti-imperialists. And I just have to say, Dr. Jill Stein is a committed anti-imperialist, like in the best radical tradition. I think that the only way that I would argue, so I don't know about the Green Party in the UK, but the Green Party in the United States has almost no liberals in it. It has a lot of white progressives. It has a lot of white environmentalists, white radicals. The older generation of Green Party leadership, I think, still reflects that demographically, but politically, it's not a party that has liberals in it. So that part, we haven't had to do a lot of house cleaning in that respect, because we know what Malcolm said, about white liberals. Malcolm said that the white liberal is a fox. That it hunts by guile and cunning. It bares its teeth, and you think that it's smiling, but you are on the menu. So we have not had, too many, liberals, white or otherwise, to deal with in the Green Party. So the Green Party has really embraced, and has been willing to be pushed. And just to be clear, like, the Green Party has run on a platform of reparations for the Black community since 2012. The Green Party has run on a platform of full liberation, divestment, from the apartheid state in Palestine since 2006. So with respect to these major policy, points of both domestic and, foreign policy, I was actually surprised myself when, because I knew about the Green Party growing up. One of my closest friends was a Green Party elected official in the city of Minneapolis. So I knew about its local politics. I did not understand the extent to which the Green Party was already standing at the cutting edge of anti-imperialist work.
Well, that's really, really reassuring to hear again. So let's talk a little bit about the Green Party and the Muslim vote at present. I think it's fair to say that you have captured the majority of Muslims, it seems to me, at least the active Muslims. And I anecdotally, I'm just picking that up through conversations I'm having, through comments on my videos, through various means. It just seems like Muslims are moving in the green direction and will be voting green. I do often get a response from Muslims who are voting green that they're ready to do so, but they don't agree with all of the policy platforms of the Green Party. And they tend to cite, more often than not, the social platform
Yeah.
of the Green Party. So can you address that for me, please?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so I had similar questions until I read the platform, and
Right.
that's when I realized that we didn't have a problem. So the first thing that I'll say before I get to the question of social issues is to talk about how consonant the Green Party platform already was with core Islamic ethical and spiritual values. So at the end,
Mm.
at the bottom of every poster, Green Party will say people, planet, peace, right? And the formal platform of the Green Party since its foundation 40 years ago, Macalester College, 1984, in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, next to my hometown, second hometown in Minneapolis, was they literally described themselves as stewards of these three things: the people, the planet, and the peace. Now, in my online community spiritual intensives, where I've taught from the West African Sufi tradition about how to tether together spirituality and social justice, I have been teaching for the last 4 years without having any awareness of the Green Party platform about the notion of khilafah, stewardship in Islam, and the principal things that we are questioned about our custodianship. These things are the rights of the people, the sanctity of human life, the sanctity of the rights of human beings, the planet, like the abomination that is the Saudi state. I mean, we can talk about that in another place. But all of these Gulf polluters have been what's the word? Disavowing this fundamental responsibility that Muslims have to be stewards of our shared home as human beings, our natural environment, and especially as stewards of the peace. And because what we have is essentially the United States empire, which is the most dangerous imperium ever to exist in human history. I mean, if we talked about Nimrod and Pharaoh and the Roman emperors, they would have all wet themselves at the prospect of surveillance capacity and death dealing capacity that the American empire wakes up with every morning. So just to be clear, our responsibility, our values as Muslims are first and foremost to be stewards of these three, and those are precisely the core values of the Green Party. So at the highest of levels, there is direct consonance. Now, with respect to the question that you asked about social issues, and this is where I think people have a huge number of misconceptions, in part because the Green Party is usually thought of as a party that is to the left of the Democrats, to the left of Team Blue, and therefore thought of as on social issues, then also being to the left of Team Blue. Whereas in point of fact, the Green Party has played precisely no role of any kind in the culture war between liberals and conservatives as it has unfolded over the last 30 plus years in American politics. You can just look that up. We're not there having an argument about LGBTQ rights versus religious rights. And the reason is that the basic principle of the Green Party is that at age 18, when a person has political maturity in the United States of America, they can live their life by whatever code they choose to live their life by. And there is not a moral argument that you are supposed to be, accepting the way that someone else chooses to live their life as a core tenet of your value as a human being. Muslims should choose to live their life by the code that they choose. Christians should choose the life by the code that they choose. Atheists, agnostics, whoever that is. And that the role of an actual democracy, the leadership in an actual democracy, is not to stoke warfare in order to cite fear between people that choose to live their lives differently, but is to create a safe space in the public environment for everybody's choices on how they live their life to be respected, and for no one to get prejudicial treatment one way or the other. And when I want to put a fine point on this to the Muslim community, I just often point out that from the standpoint of certain secular humanists, right, there is a demonization of the institution of polygamy, correct? It can be represented from their standpoint as deviance. They can frame it however they want. The Green Party is there to protect the rights of people who will live by whatever code that they have chosen for themselves, and to not impose that on other people. So when Muslims sometimes get exercised about LGBTQ issues, I remind them of a few simple facts. The first is that non-Muslims are not required to live by the Sharia of Islam. So what non-Muslims do in their bedrooms is none of our damn business. That's number one. Two, no sin puts a believing person outside the fold of Islam. Therefore, if you are a person who constructs homosexual behavior as a sin according to the traditional kind of jurisprudential rulings of Islam. And I'll be blunt about this. I will be explicit about this, is that I have never come across a plausible juristic ruling that suggests that the sin of the people of Lot is anything other than what we presume it to be. But at the same time, as all of my teachers, my West African teachers have taught me, no sin puts a believing person outside the fold of Islam. Therefore, it is not our position to chase such people away or any other such thing. Rather, it is to create an environment that fosters safety for all. So non-Muslims are not a problem, and now the Muslims are also not a problem. So then the question becomes, do you want the state probing into your private bedroom affairs in your polygamous household or in your monogamous household for that matter? Well, then stay out of other folks' bedrooms too. That is the basic, position. And when you understand that the Green Party has played no role in stoking this culture war, you realize that you are actually being given a vehicle that allows you better expression of your values and ethics as a Muslim, and more importantly, a vice presidential candidate that has sat with scholars. I do not advertise this fact, but I have traditional authorizations from scholars for texts. I don't run on that basis. That's not the basis on which I would govern. But the point is what is better, to have someone in a position of power that is capable of understanding and defending Muslim sensibilities, or to have someone who in power who has no even awareness of the intricacies of those? I know that not everyone is going to have the same understandings of Islamic jurisprudence that I have been trained with, both as an academic and as a student of knowledge. But the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam is reported to have said, disagreement in my ummah is a mercy from God. So I'm there to defend those that might see things otherwise, and to create a public space wherein the rights of all people of faith and people of conscience are respected, and to contribute in no way to this toxic environment of a culture war. And the last thing that I'll say on that is that so many Muslims do not understand the extent to which their consciousness has been poisoned by right-wing rhetoric.
Yeah, I think that's a really comprehensive answer. Jazakallah khair. Thank you for answering it in that way. Can I then ask you about foreign policy positions? Now, you said that Jill Stein and the Green Party have a very strong anti-imperialist history, and they take very strong positions on imperialism, in particular American imperialism. But does that commitment to be anti-imperialist and anti-American foreign policy, or anti-empire, does that commitment come at the cost of sometimes siding with groups and countries who are persecuting Muslims? I mean, I think I got a satisfactory answer on the Syria question from Jill Stein, but the Uyghurs, I mean, there was an interview that went around. Of course, Mehdi Hassan sent it around because it corroborates his agenda, his pro-democratic agenda for sure. But nevertheless, there was
Mehdi Hassan believes that you can oppose a genocide and support the genocider, which is a kind of madness that I have no ability to fathom. But go ahead, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. It's illogical, completely illogical. But let's just talk about the Uyghurs. In your mind, are the Uyghurs being persecuted, or even genocided? I would suggest, and are they being placed into concentration camps, or is this some sort of CIA plot to restrict the appetites of a rising power, China?
Yeah, so I'll go back to the beginning of the question and then answer the final
Please.
part. So the overall framing of anti-imperialism is crucial before we get to the second part of the question. I'll just say this. Before I was brought onto the campaign, I hosted Dr. Jill on an Instagram Live that I did, and I asked her specifically, I said, I'm not going to ask you questions about Palestine, because all of my Palestinian colleagues, both in Gaza, the West Bank, abroad, here in the US, have been pushing me towards you. So I'm not going to ask, sorry about that. I'm not going to ask questions about that. I want to ask you about our overall view for American foreign policy. And her answer stunned me. She said, my view for American foreign policy is to dismantle the American empire.
Great.
And I said, yeah, and you better hurry up and do it quick before somebody does it for you. right? That if you take those $1.3 trillion that are now spent annually on the war machine and instead put that into housing, affordable healthcare, all of the social programs that Americans need, you can cut Americans' taxes and still give them better social programming than before. You can build not a utopia, but a functioning society.
Hmm.
Whereas if you continue to squander that wealth on dealing death throughout the imperium, then somebody, BRICS, for example, is going to take your empire away from you.
Yeah.
And that can lead to a kind of collapse into fascism, which we are witnessing under both teams blue and team red. So the first thing is just to say and to affirm that there has never been a more dangerous dealer of death than the American empire, and that our aim is to dismantle that empire so that the American state survives. And
Hmm.
so that the resources of the American state can be put at the disposition of the American people, and that the globe will become a safer place when the United States is no longer the Death Star, because that's essentially what we are. We point beams and destroy whole worlds. We destroyed Iraq. We destroyed Afghanistan, destroyed Palestine. We are the Death Star. And if you have responsible, moral adults with intelligence and integrity, then you can dismantle that weapon of death and instead put all of those resources towards the construction of life and livelihood. Now to the question with the Uyghurs.
Yeah.
This is an issue. It is not a fundamental issue inside the Green Party. It is more of an issue that affects the socialists and the communists, because there is a strong authoritarian tendency. They're glossed sometimes as tankies, and it's a reference to, whether you agree with the decision I think that Stalin made, to use tanks against his own citizens to put down a popular uprising.
Mhm.
These are people that will defend authoritarians as long as they happen to be socialists or communists, as long as they happen to be anti-capitalist, and opposed to U.S. empire. So the first thing to say is that I'm not going to waste my time arguing with tankies. So let's put that part aside, right? The question about Uyghurs specifically is one of those situations where both things can be true, and some of the so-called leftists refuse to accept that something can be blown out of proportion and weaponized by CIA intelligence and corrupt liberal press, and also be true on the basis of facts on the ground.
Yeah.
Those things can both be true at the same time, and in fact, they often are. But the unfortunate logic is that people are concluding that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Therefore, I have to treat. But whereas in reality, sometimes you got two enemies.
Yeah.
Right? The enemy of your enemy is not always your friend. And as somebody that has lived in Africa for extensive periods, I speak the Wolof language fluently, speak the colonial language of French fluently. And by the way, Senegal, where I did most of my field research and have lived for years, is a socialist country. And they will be the first people to tell you that Chinese capital, while not violent in its domineering nature, is nonetheless capitalist and extractive in the way that it engages with the African continent. Chinese are not infallible. The Chinese Communist Party is not really communist. It is capitalist in the way that it organizes much of its activities at home and abroad. Last thing to say with respect to the Uyghurs, we as Muslims all know Uyghurs who will tell us directly face to face their experiences of persecution, their experiences of being oppressed, whether you call it in genocide. In the post that got the tankies mad at me was that I referred to the Uyghurs in the overall context of genocidal oppression. And I think that that is a fitting, title for what Uyghurs face. And by the way, this is not a controversial position, and it is not drawn from any Western sources. I've never read any of those media accounts nor those CIA statements. They inform my opinion in nothing. I'm an academic. I served on a search committee where we hired historians of China. So, and they were all Chinese candidates, by the way. Those Chinese candidates write and talk about Han supremacy, Han Chinese supremacy, as being more virulent and dangerous in China than white supremacy is in America. And the reason is that on an ethnic basis, the Han make up something like 91% of the total population of China. So that both the Wei and Uyghur Muslims, as well as Tibetan Buddhists and others that don't conform to the kind of, or in the case of the Wei, they conform to the ethnic basis, but not the religious basis of the kind of normative identity of the state, that they are always living under circumstances of persecution. And that, by the way, is a matter of fact, simple academic conclusion that these so-called leftists apparently have never read any books on the subject. Nor have they had any conversation with actual Uyghurs. As Muslims, we all have, and as an academic, I've read multiple works, including doctoral dissertations on these subjects. Is not a controversial statement for me to say that Muslims have been systematically disadvantaged and oppressed and subjected to genocidal practices for over 1,000 years.
Yeah, no, Jazakallah khair. I think that's a really clear answer. Actually, as you were talking, Vera, I was thinking. I mean, you've talked about the tankies and the leftists. So, where do you fit in terms of your politics? Like, would you self-describe as someone who's a socialist or as a leftist? Like, how would you describe where you are?
My entire life, I have been an anti-capitalist from the beginning. I organized a Pan-Africanist reading group at the University of Minnesota when I was 18 or 19 years old, called Africa's Progeny for Global Power. Literally from the beginning. And I was reading Walter Rodney. I was reading, the African socialists, Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Touré, and others. I learned French early on and read the French revolutionaries in their original languages whenever I could. For me, so just to be clear about this, and this is, I think, why people find me difficult to place. If you read my first academic book, The Walking Qur'an, you will find not a single reference to any Western theorist in the book. I do not take my categorical thinking from white supremacist categories at any level. I refuse to. So I actually do not, in my own thinking, situate my own politics on a left to right political spectrum. Malcolm didn't think about it or talk about it that way. He never used that language. He talked about liberals and conservatives. He did not talk about left and right, okay, for specific reasons. And though he has been claimed by many, socialists, communists, Marxists, Malcolm was not, in point of fact, a socialist, communist, or Marxist. He was explicit in his rejection of that framing as descriptive of reality, because I think that Malcolm was similarly ideologically resistant to the idea of taking some white European man as the founder of his way of thinking. So for my own personal politics have always been radically anti-capitalist, but as a believing and practicing Muslim, I use, by the way, the analytical tools that come from Marxian analysis all of the time, especially when they come from colonized and third world populations. But I never consider that the kind of doctrinaire Marxist positions as being foundational for me in any way. I find a basic flaw, actually, in much of the articulation. And as a Muslim, it's a relatively simple and straightforward one. So linguistically and analytically, the antithesis to a thing must always contain the thesis. Antithesis, right? So the thing is when you craft an antithesis, you have to respond in the terms of the original argument. Otherwise, you do not win the original argument. And what we often find in Marxist analysis is that the values of capitalism are deeply threaded within them. They're just simply inverted. They're turned into an antithesis. And that's the reason, part of the reason why what we often find is that so-called socialists or so-called communist states actually end up with capitalist structures under state control rather than under control of the bourgeoisie. So that's a structural problem, and it inheres in the kind of dialectic relationship just of these are basics of philosophy, right? That the thesis, the antithesis must also contain the thesis. Secondly, because the thesis of Marxist capitalist analysis is it is materialist. And what I mean by that is that it has no metaphysics. It takes as real only that which is empirically verifiable. And as Muslims, we must therefore reject it as the basis of our ontological understandings. We can use, and I encourage us to use, its analytical categories for thinking critically about capitalism. But no system that is purely materialist as a philosophical system is capable of actual metaphysical transcendence, meaning and by the way, Stokely Carmichael, also Kwame Ture pointed this out. Kwame Ture said that when Marx said that religion is the opiate for the masses, he said this, that was only accurate for Europe. He said that throughout the indigenous world, throughout the African world, throughout the Asian world, that the spiritual traditions of those places were emancipatory, radical traditions, and that the struggle against imperialism and against capitalist exploitation in the non-European world was always a spiritual struggle, not just a material one. And that way of thinking is much closer to my own personal thinking. Now, again, running for the executive branch, my own personal thinking informs the way that you approach policy, but it does not determine it, because it's not your personal thinking that you are there to represent. You're there to represent the interests of the people and of the collective. But when asked what my own personal thinking and approach is, that is, in a 5-minute sketch, the kind of philosophical basis of it.
Do you think Muslims in America could organize themselves independently around this philosophy?
I don't think that it's necessary that we do so. I think that part of what the Green Party is offering is, and let's just be clear about this and explicit about this. The Green Party is providing the material base, the increase in fundraising capacity, organizational capacity, political prominence that the Green Party is experiencing in this electoral cycle, which will exceed any electoral achievements even in the Nader era for sure. That is all being buoyed by the Muslims, and with a Muslim as the VP, and a very particular kind of Muslim as the VP, like a Muslim that is steeped in the Black radical tradition. And I think that it is partially because I am both very Muslim and very Black and very radical. Sorry, I said both, but I'm all I'm all of those things. That it has helped to crystallize what is going to happen in this moment and in the next moment, which is that the Muslims don't have to create their own. We have organizations, we have CARE, we have, and that we have others. What we are being essentially given an opportunity to do is to have Islamic ethics, values, and leadership provide the driving force for the third largest political party in the United States of America. The Muslims are being handed the keys. And let me just make this clear. The Muslims are also being presented with exactly the same crisis, therefore exactly the same opportunity, exactly the same dilemma that the American Jewish community faced after World War II. How do you respond to a genocide against your people? And they responded in an insular way, driven by ethno-religious nationalism, to say never again to my people, right? And they responded with AIPAC. We do not need a Muslim version of AIPAC. What we need is Muslims providing ethical leadership, spiritual leadership, moral clarity in a cohesive movement of anti-imperialist forces that are actually about restoring representative government to the people. Make America work for everyone. And so the Muslims have this incredible opportunity now, right, to provide moral leadership. And we are providing that. Like you mentioned the numbers, it's not just the plurality. It is now a majority of American Muslims that say that they're going to vote are saying that they're going to vote for the Green Party. And what it means is that this is the first community in the United States of America to say no. In point of fact, genocide is our red line. And everyone that wants to follow us in that, build community with us. And we are going to, to bring in those progressives, those radicals. But I've made this explicit. We are now in two separate polls. We are pulling more Trump voters than we are Harris voters. I mean, most of our voters are going to be people that wouldn't have voted at all. But
Yeah.
we are now pulling more Trump voters than Harris voters, according to a number of measures. And the reason for that is that all of the issues that the Green Party is running on are 70-30 or 80-20 issues for the American people. So the last part of my answer to your question is that when I see the future of the Green Party, I do not see a leftist party on this, kind of fringe left. What I see is two separate framings. If we were to borrow Malcolm's framing, I see liberal extremists on one side and conservative extremists on the other side. And I see a green verdant path right down the middle on 70-30, 80-20 issues that are of concern to all of the American people. I see the Green Party as a centrist movement, not in the compromising way that term is usually used, but if
Yeah.
you are responding to the concerns and questions of 70% of the American population that want a ceasefire, then you are in the middle. Now, if we wanted to borrow, instead of Malcolm's, kind of non-denominational, framing, if we wanted to use this left to right spectrum, we're still centrist. And the reason is, in that framing, both the Democrats and the Republicans are so far to the right that they're practically off the scale entirely. I mean, just think about the fact that Ronald Reagan in 1982, racist devil that he was. Remember, he said that he was caught on tape talking to Richard Nixon about African dignitaries that visited the White House. He called them monkeys and said that this was the first time they ever wore shoes and suits.
Hmm.
And that black-hearted devil nonetheless knew to call Menachem Begin in 1982, and he called what the Zionist entity was doing in Lebanon a Holocaust, explicitly comparing it to the Nazi Holocaust of the Jewish people. And within 24 hours, that Holocaust was ended, because Reagan didn't just threaten an arms embargo, he threatened to cut off relations. That was Ronald Reagan. He's a monster. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, 40 years later, have let a genocide linger for a full year. They are incapable of even that. So that means that Reagan was here. And now today's Democrats and Republicans are literally off the map to the right. We're still a centrist party, because the Green Party is responding to what every American wants. None of them want their tax dollars to be used to blow up babies. They all want those tax dollars to be used instead to lower income tax, provide affordable housing, healthcare. None of them want corporate domination in our politics. None of them want money to determine who wins elections. These are all right down the middle issues. And I've already made this clear that now that I've been tagged into this fight with the Green Party, I'm not coming out of it. If we don't land that knockout punch, I am running immediately for the nomination in 2028 to run at the top of the presidential ticket, and running for governor of the state of California in the midterms in November 2026. I am not letting the Muslim community or this coalition that we have been able to build, I'm not going to let us stop organizing, because I know what is going to happen if we stop organizing.
Fantastic. I have come across Muslims who are with you actually in punishing the Democrats. You've made it very clear that voting for the Democrats is untenable, it's unacceptable. And I completely agree with you. What would you say to those Muslims who are teetering, they're thinking about voting for Trump just to solidify that anti-genocide vote? Because of course, when you vote for Trump, you've got two votes, right? You're taking away from the Democrats and you're adding to Trump. Whereas when you vote for the Green Party, you've basically got one vote, because you're taking away, normally anyway, from the Democrats and you add in.
I think it's actually the opposite of the way that it's normally framed. And the reason is that if you vote for Trump, you just get thrown in with the racists and the rednecks, to be perfectly honest about it. Whereas if you vote for the Green Party, you can actually begin to develop the institutional strength in the third party alternative. So let's say you're not persuaded by the way that I just laid out the Green Party platform and its consonance with Islamic values, and you still think that a conservative, quote unquote, option is the better option for you. 70% of American independents, 53% of American Democrats, 40% of American Republicans say that what we need is an independent third party, because teams blue and red are so bad at their jobs. So the way that you can actually create change is by investing in the growth of that third party, which is us. We are the only third party that is available as an option to voters for 95% of the voters in the United States of America. We're the only one that's actually capable of reaching the 5% threshold in this upcoming election, which would guarantee us perhaps as much as $60 million in order to run the next election in 2028. It would guarantee us ballot access across the country, not in every state, but in the overwhelming majority of states. To this point in time, almost half of our budget in the first 10 months of running just came to try to secure a ballot access. So it would allow us to clear the ballot access hurdle right from the beginning. And here's the best part. It would give us a debate. I mean, imagine, imagine it's 2028 and they let, either Dr. Jill Stein or myself anywhere near that stage. And I mean, I'll be blunt about this. We don't talk about this a lot. It's not appropriate to talk about it before the election. But Dr. Jill came out of retirement to run this cycle. We've had these conversations. It's very unlikely that she would run in 2028 unless she's running for re-election. Right now, that is a very different prospect. But what that means is that and I've heard this from Green Party organizations on the ground, that you are right now talking essentially to the presumptive nominee of the Green Party for 2028, which means that they're gonna owe me a presidential debate. And man, they do not want no part of that presidential debate. And the reason is that the American people are not fools. The American people have been fooled, right? They have been conditioned to think that there are only these two choices. And that's the reason why they've attacked Dr. Jill, tried to smear her. That's why they're now trying to smear me, is that there is a marked difference between candidates with intelligence and integrity, like us, and corrupt, mediocre politicians. Because let us be clear, Donald Trump could not pass any class that I have ever taught at any university. He is dumb as a box of sticks. Okay. And that's just obvious. JD Vance, insanely mediocre as a human being, because privilege protects mediocrity. Kamala Harris as well. What has Kamala Harris ever won? She is a miserable, ineffective candidate. She's a joke. Vatican smoke signals went up anointing her. She did not win a single nomination for that office. So these are fraudulent, flawed candidates. And if they had let Dr. Jill on a debate stage during this cycle, which they were terrified of, she would have been able to say, this one here, Team Red, is a domestic terrorist and a convicted felon. This one here is a war criminal, because the ICC and ICJ have concluded that the apartheid state of, I won't even call it Israel. Israel's a name of honor in the Qur'an. The Zionist entity is an illegal apartheid state conducting a genocide in the midst of an illegal occupation. Anybody that provides material support to such is actually, in point of fact, a war criminal. And they want no part of us having the ears of the American people, which is why they tried to sue to keep us off the ballot. The crazy part is because I was in the academic world and had no interest, and in the community teaching world and had no interest in politics, they never saw me coming. They did not ban TikTok fast enough. And they did not, get to my social media account fast enough, because now that I've been tagged into this fight, especially in a position where I can represent the values and aspirations of both the Muslim community and the community that is anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, and has longed for, liberation for 5 centuries now, I am not putting down this sword. I'm going to keep fighting until we get to freedom.
Can I turn to George Floyd? I remember Yahya Sinwar, in fact, he drew a parallel between George Floyd and the Palestinians. I mean, did that resonate with you and in particular, the Black community there in the United States?
100%. I posted, a graphic. Oh man, I'm forgetting the name of the incredibly talented artist that did this. But he essentially, juxtaposed the image of an American police officer in blue with his knee on George Floyd's neck, with an IOF, soldier with his knee on a Palestinian neck. And we know that it's not just that our police state, repressive police forces here in the United States of America are often trained by the Israeli occupation forces, but it has always, in point of fact, been so. Before it was Israel, it was South Africa, and that the apartheid state of South Africa trained a lot of the police and tested a lot of the weapons that were then used on Black communities throughout the 80s. So there's been a profound resonance in that, and you've seen Black people, not just people of color generally, Black people at the forefront of a lot of these campus protests, at the forefront of a lot of this movement. There has been a rift, essentially because Kamala Harris's campaign has attempted to try to weaponize Blackness in support of a white supremacist genocide. And I've spoken about the kind of massive betrayal that is, not just of the Black radical tradition, but of Blackness itself, because African American identity, Black identity, comes into being in response to white supremacist domination. I mean, you got to understand, as a historian, I've studied this. You're talking about people that spoke hundreds of different languages, coming from, many were Muslims, many were, there were Congolese Christians, many practitioners of traditional African religions, speaking hundreds of different languages on plantations throughout the US South, but also in northern cities. People forget that slavery was widespread throughout the northern colonies until the American Revolutionary War, and it died out slowly thereafter. All of these people coming from different backgrounds, united only by the slur, of, negro, negro. I won't say the other one, on this, because I want you to be able to keep up your monetization, on your YouTube channel. Because if I say the other one, they'll cut it, right? But that's what we were called. And never before in human history had people that came from so many different backgrounds, united only by this system of oppression, made themselves into one people. Blackness is in and of itself a miracle. And it is a miracle that was defined in opposition to white supremacy. So what could be more perverse than now having Blackness weaponized in service of white supremacy? And if we have any questions about Zionism as being white supremacy in its foundation, brilliant doctoral dissertation by Maitha El-Hassan was the one that taught me this, is that she actually went through Malcolm's field notes. And after he had spent time in Palestine, Khan Yunis and other places, he wrote in his notes, he said, this is a white Jewish population being empowered by white imperialist authorities to move brown Arabs off of their ancestral lands. Malcolm said in so many words that Zionism is white supremacy. And if you understand Zionism as white supremacy, then you understand what we are actually all struggling against. My wife, for example, is Mexican American. The immigration policies of the United States of America are white supremacist policies. And her people have to fight back against white supremacy, as my people have to fight against white supremacy, as your people, as any apostate, as any, light-skinned, quote unquote, white apostate from white supremacy also has to fight back against white supremacy as well. When you understand that our shared enemy is white supremacy, imperialism, fascism, capitalist exploitation, then we are so much more numerous than our opponents are. And I'll end that, kind of discursus with this point from Malcolm. What did Malcolm say? He said two things. He said, never let your enemy tell you how many of you there are. Never let the man you are against form your opinions for you. We have internalized this idea that we are fringe, that we are weak, that we are small. No, we are not weak. We are not few in number. We are definitely not outnumbered. We are out-organized. And my goal is to do everything that I can to bring this, power coalition into being.
Of course, Barack Obama made a comment the other day about Muslim voters and the consequence of voting for Trump or voting for a third party and enabling Trump to come to office. And he painted a picture of a world which would be far worse. The Democrats that have bandied around the F word, a fascism word, describing Donald Trump. I mean, how would you respond to these claims that life will become far more fierce and difficult for Muslims, for Black Americans, if Donald Trump comes to power?
I mean, so there's two sort of basic, answers to this. The first is to just debunk the basic premise of the question. So the first
Mm.
thing to understand is that the Democrats have already lost the election, and they know that they have already lost the election.
You're confident about that,
Oh,
inshallah.
no, they know that it's happened. So they know that we are not taking votes away. They know that unless you elect the Green Party, Trump has already won. And the reason is that when I joined the campaign, I immediately got access to a bunch of polling information that I didn't have access to before. And it's clear that as early as January of 2024, the Democrats knew that they were going to lose the election. And here's how they knew is that Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, Dalia Mogahed, presented me with the data as soon as I joined the campaign in August.
Mm.
In 2020, Joe Biden in the swing states of Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and those three states, by the way, demographically with respect to the African-American population, Muslim population, and so forth, are basically the same state. They have the same kind of basic demographic makeup. So Joe Biden in those three swing states, and he needed every one of them, to win. He got 65% of the Muslim vote. He was polling at 12% in the Muslim community in January 2024.
Wow.
Dead man walking. And they have
Mm.
known, at least since January, that they were never going to be able to reassemble the coalition that got them that election. And that's why they've been coming after Black voters so aggressively, because they know that they have no hopes of putting that coalition back together. But they forgot that Black Muslims are the largest single ethnic group in the American Muslim community, so that you are never going to get Black Muslims on board with this genocidal, campaign. So just to be clear, the most recent data from Yaqeen Institute, shows how much worse things have gotten for them. This was almost a month ago now, where they were showing that 53% of the Muslims they surveyed were planning on voting third party, with over 80% of those coming to us. 14% for Kamala, 4% for Trump. So the reality is that, listen, Jews don't vote for Nazis, and Muslims are not going to vote for Democrats. You don't vote for the people that Holocaust you. And that's the reason why the Democrats have made this last second appeal to try to get Republican voters on board with people like Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney and so forth, because they know that they have no hopes of any kind of winning this election with the electoral constituency that they had before. They're dead. So the first part of the answer to your question is you can sleep comfortably at night knowing that they caused their own demise and you did not. You should vote your conscience. Vote for where you want your name on the lawh, because understand that if you choose to write your name next to the party that genocided your people, you have in essence signed your name next to Pharaoh. Well, what happened to the people of Pharaoh? The people that stood next to him were washed away with the flood, but Pharaoh was a hereditary monarch. The people did not elect him, and yet just by standing next to him, they were destroyed. What will be the fate on the day of judgment of a people who enter into a ballot box and positively affirm that they choose the people that slaughtered their brothers and sisters in the third holiest place on the planet for Muslims? It is a catastrophic decision from a religious standpoint. Every single human being that has been maimed or lost their life unjustly in that war now has a potential claim against you on the day of judgment, because you have participated in whatever crime was committed against them, because you have positively endorsed and affirmed it, and you've said, more please. Now, with respect to the specter of so-called fascism and Trump, fascism is already here. These are Democratic governors, Democratic mayors, Democratic cities that have been building these cop cities and sending riot troops in the hundreds to suppress your constitutionally protected rights of speech and assembly. Fascism is here. And it is better for these people to have a red fascist than a blue fascist, because at least when there's a red fascist, the liberals are afraid. When there's a blue fascist, the liberals will cut your throat and tell you it's for your best because those other guys are dangerous. It is a kind of collective madness. If we want to make it Quranic, because we're on the thinking Muslim, how did Fir'aun keep the people under control? He had magicians that had them spellbound. Well, who are the magicians that have the people spellbound, accepting these absurd arguments? They are the media companies. MSNBC running cover and carrying water for Team Blue. Fox News running cover and carrying water for Team Red. CNN running cover and carrying water for the 1% as a whole. And they tell you over and over again that despite the fact that all of the American people say that we need a new third party, you can't vote for them, they might not win. It's a kind of collective insanity because we've been propagandized over and over and over again to just accept these two corporate murderous parties as the only option that we have. The reality is that they're both the same party. They're purple fascists. They're a mix of blue and red. They have 99% the same donors, AIPAC and the War Machine. There is a 1% marginal difference between the Christian evangelical nationalists, which support Team Red only, and LGBTQ extremists that want to indoctrinate everyone with their own philosophical mores as the supporting the other party. So there is this skirmish between these two identity camps, each of which is trying to propagandize the other. No, you have to accept a Christian definition that life begins at conception, which, by the way, no Muslim jurist ever believed. No Muslim, it kills me when Muslims get tethered to these right-wing Christian talking points about life beginning at conception, when every single Muslim jurist that I've ever read said that the ensoulment of a human being takes place after 120 days. And that the jurists used to say about this question of abortion, which was known, that uprooting a date seed is not the same as uprooting a date palm.
I've got one final question for you, Dr. Ware, and that's really about the American empire. I mean, today we've spoken a lot about dismantling the American empire, dismantling this imperium. And of course, Muslims around the world have fared very badly with this empire and its propensity to deep militancy, to violence. We saw over 1 million die in Iraq and war on terror, and we're seeing that continuing in Gaza and in Palestine. I mean, this is all connected to the American empire. Are we ever going to see the end of this empire? Like, will we see the end of this empire in our lifetime? Like, how realistic is it to dismantle this imperium?
So across all of our faiths and philosophies as human beings, there is one universal truth that unites them all. All empires fall. All empires fall, right? Go to the end of Surah Maryam, and God asked this, question of Quraysh: have you not wandered in the earth and seen the ruins of those who were more exalted in power and wealth than you were? Do you see any sight of them now, or hear so much as a peep from them? It's a stern warning. And that is also true across secular philosophies. No imperial power can retain that power. Where are the builders of the pyramids now? Where are the builders of the Roman Colosseum now? So the problem that we as Muslims and we as formerly colonized people have is that we have internalized the chains of our oppressors. We struggle as though defeating the empire is impossible. Whereas in point of fact, the fall of the empire is inevitable. Inevitable. The most important question is what will replace this fallen empire? And that's why I'm always focused on those social policies and leading with our ethics and our values rather than vengeance and retribution, because I'm thinking about the kind of society that we want to live in post-American empire. In the Wolof language, they say, the child of Adam does not release what their hand is holding until they're reaching for something better.
mm,
right? We have to be reaching for society that's better than this imperium, because this imperium is, in point of fact, doomed. It is not impossible, it is inevitable. So then the question then becomes, well, then how do you usher in this new age? What do you do? Well, Dr. Jill Stein has already talked about this. There are 800 military installations of the US empire throughout the globe. 700 of them serve no tactical or strategic function. They are just, artifacts of empire that continue to antagonize the world with the marks of American imperialism, right?
mm.
She said that within the first year, you can get 700 of those out. That leaves 100 that have strategic importance, and you make the world safe, from us and for us. By phased negotiated withdrawals from those places to create a multipolar world. The truth is that I think part of the reason why we're drawing more Republican voters than Democrat voters, and according to some polling now, is that the so-called conservatives already perceive the futility of, wasting money and, American lives trying to fight fruitless wars in foreign countries, as they would frame it, around the world. That those get Americans killed, and they don't do anything except make the shareholders at Halliburton or Raytheon or Lockheed Martin or Boeing or General Dynamics richer. So the end of this empire is within sight. And the last thing that I'll just say about this, as a historian, right? Why has the Middle East, and the broad Middle East, stretching from West Africa through North Africa into East Africa, the lands of the Muslims, let's just be blunt about this,
Mm,
lands of Muslim majorities. From the time that Columbus first set sail, people forget that Columbus's first journeys were off the West African coast before he sailed west to go east. They were
mm,
trying to find a way around the Muslims so that they could control what had always been the most lucrative sources of commerce in human history, those that connected the Muslim world. And for 500 years, a white supremacist, imperialist, capitalist system has kept Muslims and the globe under its subjugation. First dominated by the Spanish, then the Portuguese, then the Dutch, then the French, then the British, and then after World War II by the United States of America. 5 centuries of white supremacist global domination. That era is over. It is finished. A new day is dawning, and America will either be an irrelevant, I hate to say this, former, empire, still drunk on its past glory, the way that Britain is. I mean, I saw an epic takedown, of Britain by a Chinese diplomat. He was like, "Why would we think of them as equals? Like,
yes.
what? Why? Who? Wait, are you talking about the United Kingdom? Like, who are they? Like, have them
Mm,
talk to my doorman," is basically the way that China did. And that is what is coming for the United States of America, unless its leadership embraces the idea that it still has, if not the first, then at least the second, largest and most powerful economy, still has this incredible, military capacity that could be used to keep the world safe and secure as it withdraws from its previous imperial. Those are tactical chips that you can use to keep people safe from the other madmen in the world, right? Because we do have other people with, crazy imperialist aspirations, throughout the globe. The United States of America, just by withdrawing from its imperial fantasies and instead using its resources to actually meet the needs of its people, could provide a model for all of humanity. And with me in the White House, either as vice president or eventually as president, and preferably both, you have my word that if they put the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, I would not desist from my lifelong mission of trying to live true to the values of this religion and true to the values of the Black liberatory and emancipatory tradition, which has brought so much to the Muslims, who have always, looked up to Muhammad Ali, who have always looked up to Malcolm X. And to be frank about this, the Muslim immigrant community in the United States of America is largely present because of the 1965 Immigration Act, which was born through the civil rights struggles of Black people. This is a way for our community to become whole, to get free, and to help set humanity free. So if your people did not know who I was before this interview, they need to start reading up, because that's what I'm gonna be on for these next, few years, and make, God protect us all from, from the enemies that seek to keep that from happening. And may God give us swift liberation in our lifetime, not waiting to pass this on to our children. 5 centuries of white supremacist empire is enough.
Professor Butch, Ware, it's really been a pleasure speaking to you. And I think I speak for much of my audience. We've never really come across your write-ins and your videos before, but I think, alhamdulillah, I think we'll be following much more of what you have to say in the months and years ahead, inshallah.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to the people.
Thank you very much, brother. Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels, and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.